There is a very old epistemological tale about a small group of blind men who come across an elephant. Each man feels a different part of the elephant's body and believes he knows the truth of what the creature is. Each man is correct in a way, but none knows anything near the truth of the full elephant. The idea of objective journalism has fallen out of favor with many journalists at NPR and at public media stations. To be fair, objective journalism might be a myth. To be objective, you have to remove yourself, your viewpoint, from a situation. The way I've approached being objective is to think, what would be true if I didn't exist? That means my feelings didn't exist, my opinions, my biases, my experience, etc. It's a good thought exercise, but it's also impossible to complete. I can't conceive of what would be true without my own mind in the mix. I'm using my own mind to consider it. It's like asking, what would I look like without my face? I believe in objectivity as an attitude toward reporting, an aim or a direction, but I do agree with journalists who reject it as something that can be fully accomplished. I disagree with journalists who embrace lived experience as a replacement for objectivity. A better replacement is what some journalists call depth and breadth of reporting. An even better word for me is thoroughness. If we acknowledge that we can't fully detach ourselves from our own minds, we can do our best to represent reality as accurately as possible by including other minds, even minds that see things differently. Like interviewing all of the blind men who came across the elephant in the old tale. Even getting all those guys together to discuss their findings. That's science. NPR doesn't do that and doesn't encourage journalists to do that. When an organization becomes saturated with an ideology, reporting on the whole elephant becomes a problem. So what we often get from NPR is deep reporting on a singular aspect of a story, while the whole story is completely ignored. This is on display in the next segment when Peter Boghossian and Matt Thornton discuss a story about the relationship between the transgender Twitter community and the dinosaur emoji. The journalists who produced this story surely felt they did their job. They conducted a lengthy interview with a trans woman and spoke with a specialist from Emojipedia, providing some real-world information about how emojis are born. But the story is an absolute failure because it wasn't thorough. It didn't provide the necessary background listeners need to understand what actually occurred. Peter and Matt are going to talk about the story itself, but I'm going to give you some background about dinosaurs and transgenderism that you won't learn in the piece. Here we go. We start in Great Britain. Rosie Duffield is a British Labour Party MP. Duffield has been in disagreement with other members of the Labour Party about the rights trans women should have. Duffield says she supports the rights of trans people to live freely as they choose, but she does not support male-bodied biological men to access protected spaces for biological women. She tweeted this on September 10th, 2021. Duffield was being criticized for her so-called radical feminist beliefs about women much earlier. In August of 2020, Duffield tweeted that only women have a cervix, in response to a tweet using the phrase people with a cervix instead of women. Note, radical trans activists call people who don't believe trans women should have full access to women's protected spaces TERFs. If you think it's correct to say women instead of people with a cervix, you would also be called a TERF. TERF stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. It means you are a feminist who doesn't include trans women in the definition of women. Back to September of 2021. The Labour Party had a conference and Duffield said she was not attending because of abuse and threats she received online due to her stance on women's protected spaces. At that conference that Duffield did not attend, another member of the Labour Party, David Lammy, said people with feminist beliefs like Duffield are dinosaurs. Yes, he called them dinosaurs. Again, that was in September of 2021. People who support Duffield's view about protecting biological women from male-bodied biological men embraced Lammy's insult and started using dinosaur emojis and dressing up as dinosaurs at protests. On October 8th, 2021, the British medical journal The Lancet received a visit from protesters dressed as dinosaurs. The protest was about The Lancet's use of the phrase bodies with vaginas in place of saying women. The dinosaur protesters also visited the Labour Party headquarters. Comments from David Lammy of the Labour Party in September of 2021 were the source of radical feminists taking on the dinosaur as their symbol on the street and on social media. It wasn't until October 18th that the dinosaur emoji was declared the property of trans people after Lammy's comments in September and after the dinosaur protests. You won't hear any of this background information in the story you're about to hear. Instead, the story paints a picture that TERFs took on the dinosaur emoji just randomly in order to harass people who are trans. Granted, this story is ridiculous in all kinds of other ways and also just idiotic. But leaving out the key part of the story that explains why feminists started using the dinosaur emoji and dressing up as dinosaurs. This is how people become misinformed. Next time on Morning Sedition, I'll talk about the difference between public radio and NPR.
Now that Gina's told us what the story is actually about, let's take a listen to how NPR portrays it.
Dinosaurs are back on the big screen. Jurassic World Dominion is now in theaters. Young kids always seem to love dinosaurs, and maybe we all do as we crowd into natural history museums to see them in all their bony glory. But did you know that the dino emoji is beloved in LGBTQ plus online communities? It's true. So it was upsetting for those individuals when the emoji started appearing on the feeds of an anti-trans community. Amory Sievertson and Ben Brock-Johnson from the WBUR podcast Endless Thread pick up the story.
So to understand this dinosaur emoji story, we thought we should start with a little dinosaur knowledge.
I'm a science journalist and author.
So that's what he thinks that one needs to understand the story.
Yeah, now that they've actually seen what the story is about. When we first heard this, we had absolutely no idea what to even say about this story because there's no content here that's really in any way meaningful. It's just like a petty revenge story from, something silly. But with that context, it actually makes sense. But we'll see if NPR even brings it up.
Yeah, and I remember we were looking at each other utterly mystified.
I've written books like Skeleton Keys and The Last Days of the Dinosaurs.
This is Riley Black.
Riley loves her some dinos. Now she digs for fossils professionally. She writes about it. She tweets about it. Online, she exists in multiple worlds and multiple dinosaur communities.
A lot of it is very professionalized, people talking about their new papers and new studies coming out in their latest field expedition. There's also a broader community of...
Again, it amazes me that they think that this is the requisite knowledge to understand the story. Or they don't even think it, they're just portraying it as such.
Dinosaur and paleontology enthusiasts, people who just like to know more, or they were inspired by Jurassic Park and they want to find out the real stories behind these animals. And the number of paleo artists on social media right now is astounding. Like when people talk about...
If you look through some of this paleo art, it is astounding. But within this group of dinosaur artists and enthusiasts, or overlapping with this group, there's another subset of people.
Many people who are queer, whether they are trans or some other form of genderqueer or whatever it is, we love dinosaurs.
Along with being a dinosaur expert, Riley is herself transgender. And according to Riley, there is a whole community of genderqueer dinosaur enthusiasts online.
Type dinosaur into the LGBT subreddit. Hundreds of results with pride dinos, rainbow dinos, dino moms, dino dads, and a lot of puns. Like Allosaurus.
Transceratops.
In 2018, the Twitter account for Sue, the T-Rex, one of the world's most famous dinosaurs held at the Field Museum in Chicago, That account updated Sue's bio to include the dinosaur's pronouns, they, them.
So, without the context of what we heard earlier, this would make absolutely no sense. But now that I hear this after that context again, it's actually making a lot more sense because they're setting up a false narrative. The narrative they're setting up here is that transgendered people also like dinosaurs. Who knew? I had no idea that people of various genders like dinosaurs. And then the evil TERFs are going to come.
Right.
And they're going to use the dinosaur emoji because they're interested in hurting trans people. That's the way this story is being set up. And that's obviously why they're starting with trans people like dinosaurs. You guys already know the context behind why the feminists dressed up in the dinosaur uniform.
Right.
And that's a completely different story with a completely different angle. And at this point, NPR is setting up the lie.
I'm just struck by it's not mere anthropomorphizing to give it's kind of like a political or ideological anthropomorphization when you give a gender of they them to a dinosaur. It's not even in the same species. You need another word in there like speciesization or something. It just participates in so many fallacies and category mistakes. It's hard to keep track of them all.
What's the connection between people who identify as genderqueer and dinosaurs?
I am not entirely sure why. This is an aspect of social psychology, I think, that has not been plumbed as yet.
Were you using the dinosaur emoji relatively frequently before all of this stuff happened?
I would use dinosaur emojis for emphasis, just to share things I was excited about. I'd use a little dinosaur emoji, a comet emoji, a plant emoji, and a raccoon emoji to kind of tell that story of like the dinosaurs going extinct and plants and mammals coming back afterwards and just having fun like with storytelling.
But a few months ago, Riley started to see dinosaur emoji that weren't so fun.
I think my initial knee-jerk reaction was just like, well, you can't have them. Like, dinosaurs are ours.
The T-Rex and Brachiosaurus were showing up in the profiles of a different online community.
They could have picked anything else, and it might have made a little bit more sense to me.
So the people who were, the women who were putting the dinosaur emojis in their various posts and on Twitter and different places like that were doing it because they wanted to hurt the feelings of Riley, the transgendered dinosaur.
Evidently, yeah.
Well, that's the way the story's being set up, right? They did it to hurt transgendered people.
Right.
They're using dinosaurs because the feminists knew for some reason that transgendered people love dinosaurs. That's what NPR is saying right here.
That's right.
That's exactly what's being said. It's a lot more nefarious once you understand what actually happened.
Yeah.
Riley refers to the group of co-opters as...
I get the whole thing is just so... It's not only dishonest, it's just so stupid.
It's the way this story is stupid.
Yeah.
The actual original story about what happened is quite interesting and not stupid.
Yeah.
This is NPR's version of it is stupid because I guess they had to resort to stupid in order to make a dishonest portrayal of what actually happened. How else could you twist the story unless you come up with something stupid like this?
And it forwards their narrative.
Yeah.
Right.
Riley refers to the group of co-opters as TERFs, as in TERF. Trans exclusionary radical feminists who call themselves, quote, gender critical. In other words, anti-trans. Broadly speaking, TERFs promote the idea that trans women are really men. That unlike cisgender women, trans women have benefited from being a part of the patriarchy and thus are a threat to cis women. Above all, they say that unlike sex, gender identity is an ideology and is not grounded in science.
Correct.
Factually speaking.
Yep.
You may recall the most famous or infamous person associated with TERF ideology is J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter author. Among other things, in 2020, she published a 3,700-word essay defending her belief that the term woman as a political and biological class was being eroded by people who refer to trans women.
Well, since we already know what the story was actually about, listeners and viewers can decide for themselves. But if a journal like The Lancet, which is a pretty prestigious medical journal, refers to women as bodies with vaginas, I could see where that might be offensive to some people. Maybe not. Maybe it is. That's an actual story that we could talk about. But that's what's actually going on. And is denying is pretending like there is no difference between transgendered women, people who are born male and then transition and become females, is pretending that there is no difference between them and biological women that are born female. If you don't pretend that, is that anti-trans? Like, do you hate trans people? Like, if I don't pretend like there's no distinction between somebody who transitioned to become a woman and somebody who is a woman, if I have to pretend like that's exactly the same thing, and I have to pretend like maybe they can get pregnant too, if that's what I have to do, if I refuse to do that, if I just acknowledge the reality that there is a difference between somebody that has a penis and somebody that doesn't, and that difference could manifest in important ways if you, for example, you put them together in prison, as we've seen here in the United States, where there's been women who've been raped.
Right.
If I refuse to acknowledge that distinction, does that make you somebody that hates transgendered people?
No,
because that is what the implication is. That's what they're saying.
And also this attack on J.K. Rowling. First of all, it's despicable. Second of all, it's feeding into this frenzy of hatred against J.K. Rowling for something she never said. It's just dishonest. Again, another example of dishonesty.
I'll tell you what, if somebody refers to my wife, if she goes to a doctor and somebody refers to her as a body with a vagina, I think she's going to be pretty pissed off about that. And I think she would have a good reason to be pissed off about that. And I could see where feminists would have a good reason to be pissed off about that. And maybe you don't agree, or maybe you do agree, but let's see a story about that. Why don't we have a story about it? Instead, we have to have a stupid story like this, which doesn't even make any sense without context. As far as NPR is portraying it, feminists decided to use dinosaurs to hurt the feelings of transgendered people.
Right.
That's the depth of their story here.
I guess I'm just having trouble. I'm trying to take this seriously, but I just can't take it seriously. It's just too stupid. But yet, it's a bigger problem than just a waste of time. It's an abuse of power.
It's a bigger problem because it's a waste of time, it's abuse, and it's dishonest.
Right.
It's deeply dishonest when you realize what actually happened here.
Right.
By people who refer to trans women as women. Anyway, TERFs using dinosaur emoji was a problem for Riley.
To see, our social enemies, for lack of a better term.
Poor Riley is a victim.
100%.
Boy.
Taking, these symbols and trying to use it as their dog whistle, it really just made zero sense to me.
No matter who you are.
So again, we have the context of the story. It was the feminists who were insulted by being called dinosaurs by the British MP. He called them dinosaurs. And then they took to wearing a dinosaur costume and used that in protest as a way to kind of deal with that with humor. And it appears to have worked.
And just as it made no sense to, I can't remember the person's name, it makes no sense to the listeners because there's no context.
Yeah, no,
they're not explaining
why are they using dinosaurs? Because they hate trans people.
Right. Why else would they be using dinosaurs?
They're using the dinosaur costume because dinosaur was thrown at them by a British politician as a pejorative.
Yeah.
So they adopted it. That's the actual story here. You'd never know that from listening to NPR.
They have no clue. In fact, when we first heard it, we were completely clueless.
No.
If you see something beloved taken over by someone else, that can be hard. Suddenly, genderqueer fans of dinos everywhere felt under attack as TERFs kept dropping the emoji into their feeds.
And we know how these things go. Just think of Pepe the Frog or the Punisher skull or the swastika.
The swastika has to be
in
in there.
The swastika in there.
Got to have the swastika in there.
They're Nazis.
Absolutely.
Outsider groups latch onto a symbol. That symbol is often changed irrevocably. It's not clear if TERFs knew they were co-opting something beloved to this slice of the genderqueer community. As far as we can tell,
it is clear. They adopted the dinosaur costume because they were called dinosaurs. That's why they started wearing the dinosaur costume. This person who is saying this either did absolutely no research, and then how they put together the story, I have no idea, or they're lying. Those are your two options here with NPR.
Yeah, and also many trans people are gender critical, so it's not necessarily true, like Buck Angel. But again, you'd never know any of this from listening to it.
No.
Dinosaur emoji began showing up in anti-trans Twitter bios around October of last year.
We're going to skip a section. There's Jeremy Burge, B-U-R-G-E. He's the founder of Chief Emoji Officer. It's amazing that there's such a thing. At Emojipedia. The bottom line is we're just editing this out for clarity. It actually makes the story better once it's edited out. It becomes cleaner.
It has nothing to do with their false narrative or the original story.
Yeah.
Yeah, pointless.
All right, let's continue.
Back in October, almost immediately, the community bombarded TERFs with takedowns and messages of trans pride.
One tweet seemed to bring this fight out of its bubble. It came from a pro-trans cis woman named Courtney Milan. She's a romance writer, but she also dabbles in creating emoji. And in a blow to the TERF community, she tweeted a simple message. Quote, "These emoji dinosaurs are both trans. I know this because I wrote the proposal to the Unicode Technical Committee asking for them."
The Unicode Consortium doesn't simply make emoji. People propose emoji. It is a very official process.
They are technical documents and they are trying to make the case for an emoji, but there's often little over-emphatic language often used about why it's essential this emoji be added and what the meaning is.
Courtney Milan proposed the first set of dinosaurs.
You know,
That too is dishonest. And
Yeah.
when she originally proposed this, we looked back and looked at this, there was no mention of the dinosaurs being transgendered. This is something that was done after the fact to help push the narrative.
you know, Douglas Murray is right. We've just lost bigger things to worry about, so we elevate these idiotic issues and problematize them. We make problems of things that are just...
Thousands of people being raped and murdered in Europe right now in the first large land war we've had in Europe in a long time. We've got the highest jump in inflation that the country's seen in 30 or 40 years, the largest spike in homicide the United States has ever seen, 30% in this last year. And we're talking about dinosaur emojis. Your tax dollars for NPR are going to talk about a make-believe story, which was hobbled together by them to push a false narrative and ignore what the actual story was about. I think even the actual story, I don't find to be particularly important, but it's a real issue.
It's something you can...
It's women being upset about being called bodies with vaginas and then being called a dinosaur because they don't like being called bodies with vaginas, so they wear a dinosaur outfit at a protest. That's what the actual story is about. It's not about feminists hating trans people and adopting the dinosaur because they thought trans people loved the dinosaur. That's just 100% bullshit made-up story by NPR.
So if you looked at a wall and didn't listen to this, you'd be better off because you wouldn't have false information.
100%.
It's like a revenge story.
You would know more about this story having not heard this story from NPR.
Correct.
Dinosaur emoji back in 2016. A T-Rex, a Brachiosaurus, and a Triceratops. Her proposal is 8 pages long, with charts showing how often people search for dinosaur emoji online. It includes potential meanings for the emoji.
Courtney was arguing that because she created these dinosaurs, she determined their gender, and she determined that...
Okay. I don't even know if because she...
How do you tell the gender of a dinosaur emoji? Do you have to look at it sideways, or how do you adjust the drawing?
The whole concept of pushing
that they were transgender. Does Courtney's original proposal say the dinos are, in fact, trans?
No, I don't see anything in the proposal.
No. So, a hint of honesty by NPR. They just threw all that in afterwards, and now they're going to mention it briefly at the end.
In the proposal that really makes that case.
But that doesn't mean
How beholden to an ideology do you have to be that you push a gender on a long extinct species, something that's not even in your own species, just think of the mindset that someone would have to be in to even think in this way.
Well, how weak are your arguments if that's what you're left with?
Right.
The original creator of the dinosaur emoji says that the dinosaur emoji is transgendered, and that's your evidence for pushing forward whatever
deranged
appeasal you're trying to push forward.
But that doesn't mean the person proposing it can't declare they are. Riley, for her part, wants us to remember that whatever we may think about the gender or sex of dinosaur emoji on Twitter, we should remember that the millions and millions of years of evolution in biological nature on planet Earth tells a story that's a little more nuanced.
So we don't know what determined the biological sex of non-avian dinosaurs, as in like Triceratops and T-Rex, the ones that we love that went extinct 66 million years ago.
Right.
Because we don't have the genetics. So we don't.
So the dino emoji is a stand-in for a general category of dinosaur, not a specific dino.
That's what an emoji is supposed to be, right? It's supposed to be a generalized stand-in for a category of things.
Yeah, and I would argue, no matter what you think about the dinosaur emojis, I would argue you're far better off not thinking about the dino emoji.
If you're thinking too much about dinosaur emojis, you might want to reevaluate your life.
Yeah, if you're thinking at all about dinosaur emojis, there's a deeper problem going on.
So we don't know whether it was genetically determined or today, for example, some of their closest living relatives, like alligators and crocodiles, have temperature-dependent sex determination. So the temperature of the nest determines whether more males or females are going to be born. There are some birds.
I love how they, if biology suits them, they use it, or at least they think that they suits their argument, they use it. If not, it's categorically disregarded.
That might have hormonal shifts during their life that make them present and behave differently. And the relevance there is that it tells us that what we think of as biological sex isn't binary, and it's much more malleable than we ever really understood.
In other words, in Earth's larger history, non-binary is way more common than people think.
Wow. What an astonishing inference.
And therefore,
that is based upon,
at best, it would be the naturalistic fallacy. Let's not even go
it's
there.
Not
because
even
it's
that,
such a stupid issue.
I guess it's if you have this thing for alligators and the whole. Is that the inference that one pulls as a result of this? That non-binary is more in nature than we think. This is literally listening to this, you would be stupider as a result. And it's presented as fact.
Yeah.
Unlike so many other failed attempts to save a symbol, the push against anti-trans use of the dinosaur emoji, it seems to have worked.
Hey, they won. Yay. Little happy note at the end. They won this crazy battle over dinosaur emojis.
I don't have anything else to say. This was truly a stupid and idiotic.
You know what? Here's the thing. I don't personally think that finding yourself offended at the term bodies with vaginas means you hate trans women. I don't think wanting to acknowledge the distinction between biological females and transgendered women makes you someone who hates transgendered women. That's my personal opinion. But there are people who can make that argument a lot better than I can, I'm sure, like J.K. Rowling. And why doesn't NPR have one of them on to actually articulate their point of view and then do a story about that? Because that's really what this is about. Right. The whole transgendered versus TERF thing is about language, and it's about people being forced to pretend that there is no distinction in language and everywhere else. Otherwise, you're going to be called a hater and somebody that hates an entire group of people, or a Nazi. And you're going to have subtle little things where the swastika is going to be thrown in stories by NPR and thrown at you. Why not actually have somebody on, a feminist or J.K. Rowling or somebody else, to articulate your actual point of view to the American people, and then have NPR do a story like that? That could have been the story that you heard.
Yeah, that would have.
Or they could have just told the truth about this one, because it was kind of interesting what we heard at first. The actual story was.
Yeah.
And instead they have a completely false narrative, like Teen Vogue revenge story where, yay, the dinosaur emojis win the day at the end and they're for trans people. And actually anybody that heard this story and only heard the NPR version knows less about the topic than they did before they actually pushed play.
Yeah, and that's... people tune in because they want to learn and they want to know. I'm going to end on this one thing. This is from the Journal of Zoology. Quote, "Sex is fully determined at the time of hatching and irreversible thereafter."
Well, they played a little shell game. If you listen to what they said there, there's like, alligators are non-binary. In other words, alligators can switch back and forth. And then when she actually mentioned it, Riley talks about, she says that
no alligator that's been hatched is non-binary.
Right. What they said was the temperature in the nest determines whether there's more females or males at birth. Not that once they become male, they can become female or vice versa. Two very different things. But again, there's just a deep level of dishonesty here.
Yeah, we'll post the Journal of Zoology in the YouTube comments. Okay, well, there's another.
I feel dumber.
Yeah, I don't even know what to say about it, so I guess I'll just let it stay on its own. Thanks for watching.
You probably think you've heard plenty about the trans dinosaur emoji, but I have more. There's an update and it is important. We recently received a comment about that story from a YouTube user named Fake Chuck, and I'm going to read that comment to you. This piece is so incredibly dishonest. To be clear, I'm talking about your piece, Peter. The NPR piece you are picking on for allegedly dishonestly framing and leaving out details about the origin of TERF usage of the dinosaur emoji absolutely references the Parliament event and specifically refers to it as the likely instigation of the use of the emoji. Your coverage here continuously cuts the piece off and interrupts the flow, and you deliberately and overtly skip the part of the story that addresses this while you dishonestly frame it as being a frivolous interview with Emojipedia. This is shameful propaganda that you must know is misleading people in order to push your own agenda of NPR being dishonest. This kind of action should be immediately and totally disqualifying to anyone who considers you a credible or valuable source on the subject. As evidence for this shameful narrative pushing, I present the transcript of the NPR program that is referenced here. And then Fake Chuck gives us a link, but his link does not go to the NPR program that is referenced here that we're talking about in the episode 3 of All Things Reconsidered. The link does not go to the story that NPR aired. It does not go to the story that NPR has on its website. This is not the story that was on NPR's program Here and Now. In fact, the link doesn't even go to NPR. Instead, the link goes to WBUR, a radio station that is an NPR affiliate, and its podcast called Endless Thread. And what we find is the original version of the dinosaur story and a full transcript of it. If you look at the transcript or listen to the audio, you learn that this podcast does indeed give a brief mention about why feminists took on the dinosaur symbol, which had nothing to do with a desire to steal the emoji from trans dinosaur lovers. But this podcast was not aired by NPR. NPR edited this podcast for widespread distribution on its platform and decided to remove the portion of the story that gives the background on why feminists were using the dinosaur symbol. This is quite incredible. It's not unusual for NPR to edit something that it takes from a journalist from one of its affiliate stations, or any journalist, an independent journalist, whatever. In radio, you have a limited amount of time and you have to fit that time and you have to edit things. That's just reality. But why would you edit out that key part of the trans dino story? That's much more sinister than just sloppy reporting. And I would like to apologize to the creators of the Endless Thread podcast that the NPR story was taken from, because I said they didn't do any research. I said they were guilty of not looking into the issue, of not explaining why the feminists were using the emoji. I accused them basically of sloppy reporting. But they did present the information. It was presented flippantly and certainly not in a fair, balanced, or thorough manner at all. It was still really bad journalism, but the basic information was there. It was included in the original story and was redacted before NPR released it for broadcast. If you want to hear the original story and compare it to NPR's edit of the story, we'll have links to both in the description. Now, people are going to say, oh my God, who cares about this dinosaur emoji stuff? Listen, this matters. It's not about the emoji. It matters because it shows how reality is shaped and carved to fit NPR's narrative. It matters for every single story that you hear on NPR. I have to thank Fake Chuck for bringing this to our attention. Fake Chuck said we had removed the segment of the story that explained why feminists adopted the dinosaur emoji, that we removed it. He said, quote, "This is shameful propaganda that you must know is misleading people in order to push your own agenda." And he said, this kind of action should be immediately and totally disqualifying to anyone who considers you a credible or valuable source on this subject. Well, I guess it's not us you're talking about. It's NPR you're talking about there, Chuck. Thank you for watching this excerpt from an episode of All Things Reconsidered. To watch the full episode, please follow the link in the description.